Opportunity Institute, and she is going to be teaching the education breakout option for funding for the long run. These are sign-ups if you'd like to have a email to the informational package. Pass them around on this side, and when you get to the end, just if you're not interested, just pass it along and go ahead and give her your undivided.
Thank you. Thank you. And we only have about 40 minutes, is that right? So why don't I try to go through things fairly quickly? If you have a burning question about to clarify something, go ahead and ask it. But let's try to not have a lot of interaction and discussion until we're through, so that there's hopefully a little bit of time at the end where we can have some real discussion at the end. Otherwise, I think we're going to run out of time. So just briefly, the Economic Opportunity Institute, where I work, is a nonprofit policy institute located here in Washington State, and we really focus on rebuilding opportunity and educational opportunity and economic security for everyone, trying to rebuild a viable middle class, build the kind of economy where everybody can thrive and prosper. And one of the many issues that we work on under that large umbrella is public revenue, state revenue here in Washington State particularly, and one of our first interests in revenue for Washington State is to make sure that we can really fund the kind of ample, good education system that allows all of our children to really thrive. So I'd like to start any conversation about taxes with just kind of a stepping back a step about why we have government in the first place. And in the words of the U.S. Constitution, we have government, and therefore we have taxes to support government, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty, not only for ourselves, but for our children and grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. And of course, here in Washington State, I'm sure all PTA members have memorized this clause from the Washington State Constitution, but we all know that it is the paramount duty of the state of Washington to make ample provision for the education of all children residing in the state. Well, how are we doing on that? Not real well. And in fact, not just because of the cuts we've been having over the course of this recession and the aftermath of the recession, but what this chart shows is how Washington ranks to other states over time from the early 90s through the 2007-2008 school year, how we compare to other states in our funding, both in terms of the amount of personal income we have as a state, which is this set of bars here, is comparing where we fall compared to personal income, and here is per pupil spending, and how we fall in per pupil spending. And as you can see, where Washington ranks is going in the wrong direction, right? We're now, or a couple of years ago, we were at 47th in terms relative to our state income, our state personal income in terms of funding K-12 education, and 35th in per pupil funding. I don't think that's where any of us really think Washington State should be. And of course, meanwhile, the kinds of challenges that our public school system is asked to deal with, not just in terms of educating kids, but all of the kinds of social problems and the issues that the state, that the educational system deals with, those kinds of issues continue to multiply and bring extra challenges to our public education system. So what this graph shows is the percentage of families with children in our state who meet the income qualification for free or reduced lunch, which is 185% of the federal poverty level. And it shows it by several of the counties in the state. These two here show Washington in 2008 and Washington in 2010. So you can see there has been some increase. The blue bar is married couple families with kids. The red bar is female-headed households with children. Perhaps not surprisingly, but I think a little bit shockingly, the percentage of single mom families in our state whose kids qualify for free and reduced lunch is well over 50%. In Yakima, it's nearly 80%. And both those figures, though, have been increasing over the last couple of years. Yeah, there are statistics of single fathers, and they actually fall in the middle. Actually, I actually had it in the chart, but it was a little too complicated, so I took that out. But that's a good question, and actually single dads are sort of like right around in here. So, but typically, not in every case, men tend to make more than women. Single dads tend to do a little bit better on average than single moms. And it's not just the K-12 system where we have financial challenges. I think all of you are well aware, too, that it's not just our K-12 system that's been impacted by the budget cuts we've been dealing with. Our higher education system is as well. And college is really being priced out of reach of the typical family. What this graph shows is the percentage of the University of Washington's tuition relative to state median income. So sort of what the typical family in the state, what percentage of their income they have to pay to send a kid to the University of Washington to pay tuition and fees, not for room and board. Back in around 1990, it was about just over 6% of the typical family income. It had gone up to about 8% by about 2000, and it's now up to almost 20%.
20 years, it went up 3%. 10 years, it went up.
And we weren't doing real well in K-12 spending relative to other states. We actually do pretty well in community college. We actually have really good access relative to a lot of states to community colleges. But in terms of producing bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees, we again fall pretty far short in terms of comparing how many kids we graduate from a four-year college per 1,000 20 to 34-year-olds, so you're sort of holding the states constant. We're 41st and 42nd when we look at graduate degrees. Again, not a really good place to be. So, we have some real challenges in terms of just the need for expanding our access and investment. Well, so you probably all heard about the state budget problems over the last few years, and probably over the last few hours, you've been hearing about the state budget problems. This is one visualization of how big the hole is that we're actually talking about in terms of the state budget. So the blue bars here are the state general fund spending in your general fund, so it includes things like the Education Legacy Trust Fund and whatnot. From the 95-97 biennium and on through to the just adopted budget for the 2011-2013 biennium. And the sort of white empty hole shows what we would have been growing at had we continued growing at the same rate that the state budget grew during the 1990s to accommodate inflation, population growth, growth in personal income, changing standards of what we should be investing in and whatnot. So that's what the white box is. The red bar on the top, writing on top of that, is how much the state budget would have grown had it grown at the same rate as the state personal income. So if we had grown as much as state personal income, we would be quite a bit higher. So the budget that we had just adopted is about $11 billion for the biennium, short of what it would have been had we continued to right along on the same
Marilyn?
trajectory.
Marilyn, excuse me. We're going to open this wall because we have a lot more people that would like to come in. So if you just if you want to
Sure,
continue to
okay.
talk, just give us a second. The wall will be moving, so you guys need to kind of stay away from it. There's just so many people over there that would like to come in here, and it's getting a little too full.
She moves walls.
Yeah,
I know,
but can she balance the budget?
Oh,
The sign-up sheet that's going around, what you would actually be signing up for, if you actually do sign up, is EOI has about every 2 weeks, we send out a little email newsletter. My executive director does a column in the Everett Herald every 2 weeks, and so the column is in there. And then any reports we've just published, something from our blog, any announcements about anything going on would be in that. So it's a way to kind of keep up with certain kind of analysis of what's going on around the state in terms of our economy, particular public policies that are happening, And so if you're interested in getting that, you can either sign up now or come up and see me afterwards if you somehow missed that. I sort of hesitate to just keep going on, but maybe I should. Okay. Snooze lose, yeah. And this is probably something that you also are fairly familiar with, but this is just a pie chart of what the state general budget funds. And so about 43% at this point of the budget that was adopted for the 2011-2013 biennium. And this is before the $1.4 billion hole that they're now talking about. But this is what they adopted last spring. About 43% of it goes to K-12, another 8% to higher ed, and then all the other stuff that we fund. And of course, you all know there were a lot of cuts to K-12. Everything across the state budget has been cut over the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, there was just a new announcement came out that the governor is still freezing any rulemaking that's not completely necessary, so that when this legislature passes a law, the state writes detailed rules on how to implement that law. They're not doing any of that because that's considered sort of unnecessary. All of it, there's hiring freezes, state employees are on mandatory furloughs. We saw what happened to higher ed. There have been really a lot of cuts across the board. And this last biennium, for this next biennium, K-12 took a pretty big hit of about $2 billion. Those are in millions. So about $2 billion being cut. The 728, Initiative 728 Student Achievement Funds, the teacher COLAs, other salary reductions, but lots of other kinds of reductions in lots of different categories. And then some modest increases as well were also, cost of living increases. So actually the same time that Initiative 728 passed to put additional money for class size reduction and other student achievement things in, the voters also approved annual cost of living adjustments for teachers. And so that has also been routinely suspended every time there has been a budget problem. And not only for teachers, but then also other associated staff that weren't included in that initiative. In good times, they also get cost of living increases, but in bad times, they don't get those cost of living increases either. Well, at the same time, even though we haven't been doing all that well in terms of funding our education system, we have been adopting some policies that I think overall are relatively good and forward-looking. There's been, of course, some dispute over some of the specifics. But the last couple of years, the legislature has taken a stab at some fairly significant reform in terms of higher standards for high school graduation, funding all-day kindergarten for all children, having a higher sort of base allocation per student to fund all of the stuff that needs to be funded and whatnot, class size reduction, with a goal of getting down to 17 kids in the lower grades. So the estimate for when all of those are supposedly fully implemented by 2017, when all of those policies are supposed to be fully implemented, we're talking about an additional need for $3 billion to fund those new. That's a biennium. That's by
2 years.
And there's there's lots of different pieces that could be. So it's costly. Yeah, it's not chump change. And go ahead.
$3 billion before any of the cuts for the last 3 years. In other words, is it $3 billion to get us back up to where we were before the cuts, and then to meet the goals, or do we have to have additional money to put us back where we were?
Yeah, that basically assumes you fill the hole and then more on top. For the most part, though some of the hole was postponing some of those improvements. But so it does get really complicated. It's very hard to figure it out. And I tried to consult with some experts on exactly that question to make sure I could answer that question. And then I was hoping nobody would answer because the answer I got was like, huh? But it's basically on top. I assume it's on top. Yeah. So there's the question.
Well, I remember last year we had Bill Gates Senior come and show us the chart and laid it out in simple terms for us how the wealthy aren't paying their share and the moderate and low income are paying too much. And yet the people of the state went ahead and voted down. I mean, I don't understand it. It's like we shot ourselves in the foot even though he explained it to us. You know, he was trying to help us, you know what I mean? So, I mean, what do you say about that?
So that's a real issue. And why don't we try to go through the rest of it, because I'm actually coming to that very point, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some conversation at the end of this. So a big part of the problem, I mean, the recession is clearly a huge part of the current problem, right? People just aren't buying enough stuff. Businesses aren't doing enough business to pay their business taxes, and basically consumers aren't consuming enough. Sales tax. This is how we get our general fund revenues right now, and about 52% of it comes from the sales tax. So when you have a situation like we have now, where personal income is down, a lot of families are really struggling. People have either lost a job or lost hours, or feeling really insecure and not making a lot of major purchases. That really hurts us a lot. And that's really the sort of the crux of both the short and the long-term problem. Because the long-term problem, even once the economy recovers, and which it will eventually, sooner or later, we're still going to have a problem. You remember that how we were declining relative to other states in funding K-12 education over the last 20 years, you know, even during economic boom times. Other states were able to continue funding education at a higher level than we were, or continue investing more in education relative to us. So this is a good part of the reason why. The green bar here is taxable retail sales, starting in 1979 and continuing through the projection for 2012. The red line is growth in state personal income here in Washington. How much individuals have in Washington state in terms of income. And as you can see, there's kind of a growing gap between those. And since over half of our funds come from the sales tax, and the sales tax is basically covering a smaller and smaller part of our economy, as people spend more and more on services, that's a real problem. There's really two problems. People are not spending so much stuff on stuff, much money on stuff that's subject to sales tax. And the other is the growing disparity in income, the increasing concentration of wealth among a very small group of people that just can't possibly spend all their money. So that the middle class has actually a smaller share of income now to spend than they did 20 years ago. And so that also feeds into the problem. But we then have the most regressive tax structure of any in the country, which means that our low-income people pay more than low-income people do in other states. And the highest-income people in our state pay much less than high-income people do in other states. So the blue bar here is Washington, and the green is the U.S. average of all the states in terms of what percentage of their income people pay in total state and local taxes. And for the first 20%, the second 20%, the middle, Washington, and even the fourth 20%, Washington residents are paying more than their counterparts in other states. But when we get to the top 20%, our people are paying less than they are in other states. And of course that relates to the fact that the majority of other states have a state income tax that taxes income, and we here in Washington are among the 7 states that don't have any income taxes. So we are facing some immediate challenges and some long-run challenges. The legislature will be going into special session in late November, and adopting a supplemental budget that's going to cut the budget they just passed in the spring by another $1.5 to $2 billion. Because while they expected a little bit of recovery in the economy, that's just not happening to the extent that it was forecast. So the state revenues just are not coming in at the rate that was projected last spring. And so they're going to have to cut some more out of the budget. So the special session, the hope is that they can deal with cutting the budget in that or raising revenue. And then in the regular session, they can do their usual policy stuff that they would do in the off cycle. Thank you, Kristen. So far, they've mostly been cutting. They've done a few little forays into raising taxes, but they must have been cutting programs and staff and whatnot over the last couple of years. The real challenge that they face, there's several of them. One is that last fall, a year ago, when the voters turned down the income tax initiative that Bill Gates talked to you about, they also passed the Tim Eyman initiative that required a 2/3 majority in both houses of the state legislature in order to raise revenues in any kind of way, including closing business tax loopholes. Or any way to raise revenue requires either a 2/3 majority in both houses of the state legislature, or it can be passed by a simple majority and then put out to a vote of the people. But legislators are really scared of taxes and approving taxes and sending them out. And it's actually, given what's been happening, the dynamics of the legislature over the last couple of years, even getting a majority for anything has become kind of difficult. So that's one challenge. Of course, the continued bad economy is a huge challenge. Public distrust of government and of the legislature continues to be huge. That was a big part of why the income tax initiative last year was defeated. And the legislature really is disheartened. I mean, they are really beaten down. Not a single one of them ran for office in order to be cutting children off of health care, slashing education programs, and making the UW cost 20% of the typical family's budget. Not a single one of them ran for that purpose, and they don't like doing it. They are feeling really, really disheartened, and like they really have very few choices. And that becomes a problem because people who feel hopeless are less likely to go out and take some risks. But I think, so it's really up to us. We have to convince the legislature that they can do something and that they should do something, and that we'll have their back if they do. So from my perspective, having looked at this for a long time, there really are some principles in terms of doing this sustainably. One of the reasons that Tim Eyman's initiatives are so successful is because if you remember that chart that showed how much people here in Washington pay compared to their income relative to other states, a lot of people really are paying too much in taxes. Most of the voters really are. And so, of course, they don't want to increase their own taxes when they're already paying probably a little bit more than they should be. So one of the things, and number 2 on this list here, is one of the things that we should really be doing to look at sustainable ways to fund our education system, is to figure out ways to raise taxes on higher income people and ways to cut taxes on low and moderate income people, or at least hold those constant. Make our system less regressive and more progressive. Another is dealing with that structural deficit, the fact that we're so reliant on sales tax on a shrinking part of our economy. We need a source of revenue that grows naturally as the economy grows, and grows naturally as our demand for a better education system grows. We need to address the business tax inequities which are rife within our system, and I don't know if any of you are business owners, but if you are, you probably can speak to that. And we need to raise enough money. We're not raising enough money, and we need to raise more. So I think there are things that we should be pushing the state legislature to do in the special session. I mean, one possibility in terms of what they could do right now is when they get into special session, they could in fact approve some package of revenue increases and put it on a March ballot so that we actually start getting revenue in the door more quickly and don't have to do even more drastic cuts. And at this point, there's not a whole lot to cut. When K-12 is 43% of the state budget, and you got to cut another $2 billion after you've already been cutting everything possibly discretionary you can find in there, you know, K-12 is going to take some more hits, and higher ed is going to take some more hits. So we need to start looking at some things. So one of the ways to go about doing that is to suspend some of the tax breaks. We have over 500 special tax preferences in our tax code. A lot of them have been piled up over the years, and over the last 20 years or so, there's been a real proliferation of new tax breaks. The problem with those is many of them are fine. You know, they were passed with good intent, for good reason, and you know, there were good arguments for them. But once passed, they are never reevaluated in terms of, is this still the priority for the way we're going to be spending our money relative to the other things we could be spending our money on? Once they're passed, they just continue right along. So we know early education, pre-kindergarten, is a really valuable investment. And yet we cut it every time because we can't afford it. We know that preventative health care is a really good investment, and yet we cut that. There's all sorts of things we know are really good. We cut it because there's only so much we can spend. We never rate the tax breaks once they're cut by that same kind of standard. If we were going to give tax breaks, is this the way we do this?
I mean, I'm sorry, are you saying that we as the PTA can make this happen, or you're just telling us what, I mean, in other words, are you going to get to that where, you know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, we as the PTA, you know, I agree with you on all these things, but what are we going to, is that what you're going to tell us about?
We as a PTA can do anything.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So I'm almost done, and that's a great question to start the discussion. So here are some of the specific tax breaks that the legislature, that have been actually in nonpartisan evaluations, have been questioned about whether they're actually fulfilling a strong enough public purpose to continue. And together they bring in a lot of money. So maybe these should at least be suspended for 3 years. And then reevaluated before and reenacted. If they're really valuable, let's reenact them. But in the meantime, maybe we just need to suspend them and get ourselves out of this hole a little bit. Invest some of this money in jobs and in education so that we come out of the recession better and stronger. There's also ways that we can expand the tax base in a variety of ways. The state could do it in an admissions tax on the opera, movie theaters, and the like. We allow people who live in states without a sales tax not to pay sales tax when they come and shop in our state. That's something that we could get rid of. There's been proposals to put a beverage tax on bottled water and carbonated beverages. We could actually put a sales tax on gasoline, which a lot of states actually have a gas tax and a sales tax on gasoline. So when the price of gas goes up, you actually get some additional money in the door. And that's money that can be used both for transportation, but a little bit more flexibly than our current gas tax, which can only be used for roads. It can't be used even for public transit, or for, say, building sidewalks in communities where there aren't sidewalks and kids are having to walk on the side of the road or whatnot. We should put a luxury tax on vehicles and boats and airplanes over $50,000. And these are in millions of dollars, by the way. And we could, in fact, do an income tax. And if we get a 5% income tax on incomes over $1 million, that would bring in close to $1.5 billion per biennium. So there are things that the legislature could refer out to the people that would then require a vote of the people. None of these are going to get passed by 2/3. That's just not going to happen. What is possible is that there would be a simple majority that would refer things out to the voters to pass. But to do that is going to require the legislature hearing from a whole lot of people that this is really important. We've done enough cuts. It's time to start raising some revenue. It's time to start raising some serious revenue. And if you'll pass something and refer it to the people, we'll work with you to make sure that it passes. And as a, the that's only going to be the first step, because we need to really continue seriously addressing that long-term problem, the long-term structural deficit, to get to the kind of education reform that I think we'd all like to see, not just in the K-12 system, but having a really robust early learning system so that all kids are kindergarten ready when they start school, and that really opens the door of higher ed to all kids who graduate and are capable and want to go to college. We really should be allowing that opportunity for all of those kids too. So none of that is addressed in the K-12 part of it, that we've made some progress in terms of policy in those areas too, but again, not in funding it. So we have a lot to do. It's going to start with a few steps. They may be painfully small steps, but it's not going to happen without some real pushing from the people. Yes?
I have a question, just for clarification on your slide, the possibilities for progress in suspending the tax breaks. The one that was most alarming to me for the banks and mortgage loan deduction, that's 172 million, right? Can you explain exactly what?
And I know we can't even tell what half of these things are with these little shorthands. So back in the 70s, when most people got their mortgage from their little neighborhood community bank, and then their neighborhood community bank held on to their mortgage through the life of their mortgage, the legislature passed a B&O, the main business tax, it's called the Business and Occupation Tax, or the B&O tax. The legislature passed a B&O tax deduction so that what the bank made, their profit that they made on your home mortgage, they wouldn't have to pay the B&O tax on that. And supposedly the purpose was to encourage, there were really high interest rates in the 1970s, and it was to encourage home ownership and whatnot. Now, in the era of big banks, multinational banks, and where your mortgage is never held by anyone who's ever had a mortgage, has it been held by the same bank forever? No, I mean it gets sold and resold and resecuritized and whatnot. So, and there is absolutely zero evidence. This was just evaluated by this nonpartisan body in the state last year. There's absolutely no evidence that Washington homeowners ever benefited with lower mortgage rates because of this deduction. It's basically feeding the profits of Bank of America.
It's a tax break for banks.
It's a tax break for banks. And so it's, so that's what that one is.
It's not a tax break.
It's not a tax break for us. It's not a tax break for you. It's a tax break for the banks. And it could actually be structured a little bit, and that amount could be lowered so that it actually would allow the smaller community banks to continue to get it, but have the bigger banks not be able to take it any longer. That would be one of the
And the
possibilities.
largest one, right, most alarming, the interstate commerce tax break. Could you just
Yeah. So
a little bit?
modern ideas. And there's about 4 that fall into that category. It gets really complicated, but back, in the mid part of the 20th century, when a lot of our tax code was adopted in the 1930s, and at that time, the understanding of the U.S. Constitution has this interstate commerce clause that says the states can't regulate interstate commerce, right? That's what that interstate commerce clause is. So the legal understanding at that time was basically that states then couldn't tax anything that had to do with interstate commerce. There have been a number of court cases over the years that have pretty drastically changed what's allowable and what's not allowable to tax, and a number of states have started taxing things. So like, for example, if you ride it, I don't even know if Greyhound exists anymore, but if you ride a Greyhound bus from Seattle to Spokane, there would be a tax that would be paid because that's not interstate commerce, that's not interstate transportation. But if you rode from Seattle to Coeur d'Alene, there would be no tax. It'd be, if it were wholly in the state, they would tax it. But if you just go to Coeur d'Alene, or you just go to Moscow, Idaho, they wouldn't tax it, any of it. So it's been very clear from court cases that you can tax the part of it that's in the state. Well, it's different from the Amazon. No, that's a whole other. that's another. So it's things like that. That's what that one is. And there's a bunch of different specific ones that deal with whether you're transporting people or freight, whether it's interstate or international, so there's a bunch of them, but they add up to a fairly hefty amount. And a lot of states have already taken these actions of taxing those kinds of activities. And you'd be taxing the part of the activity that's taking part in the state of Washington. You wouldn't be taxing the part external. Yes.
So when I'm looking over these sort of itemized lists, I don't see them addressing the fact that poor people are paying, like 17% of their income in taxes. And I know that Washington Community Action Network had all of these listed out and could not get a lot of traction from the mass public. And I was thinking, if we sort of frame the conversation that we're trying to take it from the most regressive taxation structure to a more equitable taxation structure, then I feel like we would have the upper hand of the zeitgeist. So I was hoping we could talk about how to make it more fair.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good point, because a lot of this has, I mean, you can get into the weeds on the technical details, but a lot of it really is in how you're framing it. And part of it is asking people to pay their fair share, right? And so part of it is asking companies that are now getting special tax breaks that they should in fact be paying their fair share. And we shouldn't be putting the entire responsibility for funding the services that all of us rely on, and that the most successful and wealthiest of business people benefit from having a well-educated population. And so that there are lots of reasons why everybody should be contributing to all of the services that make this state a good state to live in and do business in. So I think you're absolutely right that the messaging, the way it's packaged, has a lot to do with whether it's going to be successful.
So you talked a lot about revenue growth. Has your institute done any work on making the economy more viable? And where I'm going is I work in the construction industry, and we always say that, 50% of zero has the same conclusion as 20% of zero. So, we need to grow the pie bigger, as well as maybe talking about revenue enhancements.
Absolutely, and I think one of the critical things here is what you do with the money, right? And there are a number of ways that would make good investments of the money. One of the best investments of the money in terms of getting our economy, and one of the best things we need, the most important thing we need to do actually is get our economy going again. And construction has just been devastated. It's 40% unemployment in construction. So one of the things that you could do with some of this money is, in fact, invest in ways where you really do directly create jobs. And state spending actually does translate into growth in the private sector as well as growth in the public sector. So every school teacher goes out and spends the money, right? And so that helps create jobs within the communities in which they're operating. But there are also ways that you could directly invest in all sorts of public projects. We have bridges falling down, we have schools that really need to be retrofitted for energy efficiency, that need to be rewired, that need to have the rain not coming through the roof. My kids' middle school is always leaking. There's lots of things that we could do that would actually help get people back to work and help that cycle of getting the economy going again. And in the long run, save us money. If we improve our infrastructure, that's actually going to come back and benefit us with lower energy costs in the long run, and as well as better facilities for our businesses and our kids. Yes.
Given our tax structure, how many dollars does our state lose to other entities, whether it's federal or other states? I'll take an example of several things you have up there. Those taxes are being paid to somebody, just not to us. What would be your best guess on what that dollar amount might be on an annual basis?
Well, I'm not sure what the total is. I mean, certainly with the income tax is a good example. I mean, in every other, in states with an income tax, which is most of them, the other 43 of them, you can deduct what you pay in state income tax from your federal income taxes, and therefore your federal income tax bill gets lower, even though we can deduct sales tax from our taxes. The studies that have been done show that higher income people deduct far, far less in sales tax than they do in income tax in the states where they conduct the income tax. So that's one example where basically, we could collect some free money practically by having an income tax on high income people.
Well, do you have a guess what that number was or is? I mean, again, that'd be an approach back to the messaging where we're not raising taxes, we're simply keeping it. And is it a significant number? I don't know whether it's.
Well, it's a significant, I mean, it depends on what you mean significant. It's not the 12 billion that we really need, that we don't have, it's nowhere near that. But, for any of us, it'd be pretty darn significant. I mean, it's a lot of money. It's not.
Couple of billion?
No, it's not. I doubt it's quite that high. Are we running out of time?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that if we had a progressive income tax that didn't just target the 1% over $1 million to 5%, then we would have enough money, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So-
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and the way to really make our system progressive and not regressive is you have to lower the most regressive taxes. And in order to afford to cut our sales tax, which is the most regressive of our taxes, we have to have something really big to replace it. And the income tax initiative that was on the ballot last year, that my organization was actually very heavily involved in putting together, didn't raise enough money just on the top, like 3% of taxpayers, in order to cut the really regressive taxes. But if you had in order to cut the sales tax, you need a general income tax.
Is your agency, the EOI, or any other group that you know of, launching a campaign to put any of these things into the legislation? Something so we know we can piggyback on.
There's actually there's a couple of different tables of groups that are meeting. There's a revenue coalition that includes education and human services organizations that have been meeting together so that they're not, just trying to fight over the crumbs and steal, cut them and keep me whole, but really try to advocate for a bigger pie together. And there really is some strong interest among that group in doing, really advocating for some strong revenue. And there are other groups like Citizen Action and there are a lot of organizations out there that are really interested in this. And part of what EOI's role is in the whole constellation of things is helping develop some of the policies and doing some of the research in order so that advocacy groups have some tools at their disposal when they go and advocate for policy change. And at this point, we're just getting into analyzing things right now. So in the next few weeks, we'll be putting stuff up on our website. Right now, we don't really have a lot that's really up to date. We have a lot of stuff from last year up on our website. But a lot of this will start being up there. I brought a few handouts that are about half of the slides, but I didn't bring this many.
You guys please be very careful with people sitting in the aisles in the league, not to be able to yourself or someone sitting on the floor. Just be really, really careful. Please. Nobody get hurt on a watch.
But if you're really interested in signing up on those sign-up sheets, would be one way to be sure that you are kept up to date on things that are going on. So if you didn't get a chance to sign up, then sorry.
No, she didn't charge.
So can we get her to give
You realize that she's the EOI. Okay, I got you.